Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, Vietnam!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for speed.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Moviescramble podcast. At the time of recording, it is an unprecedented heat wave in Scotland, so your hosts are slightly shiny today, not that you can see. And prior to recording, we had a much longed for reunion in Glasgow City Centre where we actually got to meet up in person, and it all culminated in an illustrious black and white photo shoot outside Buchanan Street bus station. I am joined by both of the boys today. So John and Simi are here. John, how are you?
I am cracking, yes. I am on holiday as of about an hour ago. So I'm off for the next 2 weeks. And I'm in a very happy place at the moment.
Oh, that's good. And Simi is definitely in his happy place because he has a drink with him. How are you?
I am very well. You're correct. I am in a good mood. I've had a terrible week, but it's been a good day, and I'm quite elated just to be doing this and seeing you two again. Obviously, we met up the other week for a few drinks and that. It was just a really good night. That's all you can really say. Got some films to talk about, and just, yeah, good mood.
So on today's episode, or tonight's episode, whenever you're listening, we are continuing our Hitchathon by looking at two movies that I'm sure everyone will be familiar with, Rope and Strangers on a Train. First film we're looking at is 1948's Rope, starring John Dahl, Farley Granger and Jimmy Stewart. It was adapted by Hume Cronin, and Hitchcock fans will recognise him as the nosy neighbour from Shadow of a Doubt, and was adapted from Patrick Hamilton's stage play of the same name. It's kind of famed for being shot in one take, and it surrounds the murder of a student by two of his fellow students, played by Dahl and Granger. They host a dinner party in his honour, knowing full well he's not going to turn up because he is the body in the trunk, and it is left to Jimmy Stewart's university professor character to try and crack the case. It's probably one of Hitchcock's most well-known movies, not just for the cast, but for the one-take element of it, and it's a classic kind of thriller whodunit as well. John, what are your thoughts on this movie?
I love this movie. I remember seeing it a long time ago when I was very young, and I was totally captivated by it, primarily because of the way that it's set up and the fact that it's a one-take movie. It was something I hadn't seen before. It was very unique to me, and I just thought it was absolutely wonderful. Having watched it again, though, I still enjoyed the movie as much, but I did realise that every single character in the film is a total shit. It's a horrible bunch of people all collected in one single room for the space of an hour. Now, obviously, some of them are intentionally horrible, and some of them are just horrible by the way that their characters have been drawn in terms of the type of people they are. They're not. I think it's meant to be a broad representation of sort of upper middle class New York, I would say, rather than anywhere else. But yes, there's some very not nice people, and also the fact that, like you mentioned there, it's two students murdering another student, except it looks like it's two middle-aged bank managers doing the same to one of the junior bank managers. That young people look very different in those days. Now, they must have only been in their 20s, or supposed to be in their 20s, but they look so much older because of the way they acted and everything. So it was very strange going back and watching it, but yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. One of my notes is, I can't believe that two young students are in three-piece suits in a ginormous apartment in New York. Like, it does seem really sort of... student digs have obviously degenerated quite significantly over the years. Simi, what are your thoughts? I know you watched it a wee while ago, but what are your kind of standout points for you?
Yeah, for me, it's watching this film last year for the first time. And I know we had mentioned it in the podcast before, and you mentioned the one-take element of it. But as I was watching it, I totally forgot it was shot as to appear in one take. 'Cause it's not actually one take, is it? It's just edited to look that way, I believe. It's long takes, yeah. And as I was watching it, it took me like maybe 10, 20 minutes watching the film going, oh, man, actually, I've not seen a cut yet. And I was like, oh, this is a film they mentioned. The pod not kind of fell in. But for me, the big takeaway from this, I found quite novel, was it's essentially a murder mystery film without the mystery, because you know who the killers are. Right at the beginning of the movie, it says, these two guys admit to the murder. And the rest of the film is Jimmy Stewart playing the kind of detective in a way, where he's trying to unravel the mystery, but you already know. But it doesn't make it any less engaging, because the thrill for it isn't the end in that case, it's a journey and him putting all the pieces together. That really struck me as unique. And yeah, I just thought it was very well done. There's a specific scene near the beginning when he's hiding, one of the killers, can't remember who it was, he's hiding the rope that he murdered his friend with, and the door swings, and you see him kind of drop it in a drawer, as the door swings back, and it's just a brilliant shot. It's just so like mustache twirling evil villainy. But
yeah,
I think he's actually smiling as well as he does it. You know, it's just because these two guys are just so happy. Yeah, they're just so happy about them committing this perfect murder as they see it. They're so overjoyed about it. You just keep thinking, I can't wait till you just get caught.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I think that, you know, Brandon Dahl's character in particular is the more obvious villain, and that he's so arrogant. You know, he says that some lives aren't worth living, other people are inferior. He talks almost kind of master race type terms, in a kind of similar vein to one of Bruno's speeches in Strangers on a Train, and very, very similar to Uncle Charlie in Shadow of a Doubt as well. So he obviously is the more obvious villain, and Philip seems kind of weaker, and you think he's going to crack first. What did you think of the duality of the two characters? The fact that there is one very, you know, sort of very obvious villain, and someone who was maybe a little bit more of a liability.
It's a sort of standard alpha male situation, isn't it? Brandon is very much the alpha male within his small bubble. He's in charge of that. He's looked up to. He's the one that gives all the directions, all the orders, until he's presented with Philip, who he looks up to. And as soon as he meets him, he stutters because he's excited and he stutters. But yeah, Brandon is very much almost like, as you said, Thomas, the moustache twirling bad guy. You can see it in the way that you get a glimpse of it very early on, where he talks about the murder that he's just committed, and it's almost sexual in the way that he talks about it. His breath starts to shorten, and he holds himself up a bit straighter, and you can see him. He's actually almost like perspiring and everything. It's very much a physical sensation for him, and it's almost as if he's hooked on that. You know that if he actually did this and got away with it, he would do it again, because the thrill was such that it started off as an intellectual exercise and it ended up something far greater than you could ever hope for.
The whole setup is very sexual. So the film opens with Brandon and Philip, you know, strangling David with the rope, and then there's almost that kind of like post-coital cigarette straight away. And then, as you say, Brandon comes up to Philip. He's very breathless, and he actually says, you know, how did you feel? And there's this like pause, and he's like, during it, and you're like, oh my god, this guy is totally getting his rocks off in what he's just done.
Yep. Oh yeah. If the camera had panned down, there would have been a semi down there.
I think that really kind of adds to the over-the-top villainy of it. It's that very tune, the scenery aspect of it. And obviously, we've spoken about this before in previous podcasts, that films of this era do have more of a kind of theatrical performance to them, because we have actors that were more used to performing on stage, and they carry that over to film. This works really well for it, because, yeah, it's based in a play, but it's also shot like a play, that one-shot element. And you can forgive the characters a lot more for, I don't like using the term overacting, because that makes it sound like they're bad, but overemphasizing their performance, so to speak. And it works really well in the context of the bad guys, especially because it's not supposed to be this really grim, gritty thriller. Like, if it was that 70s film Hitchcock we went and watched.
Frenzy,
yeah, it's not supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be terrifying. It's supposed to be, I wouldn't say fun as such, but more kind of titillating maybe. I don't know.
Oh, I think that is definitely the right word. I mean, I do think that John Dole's excellent in this. I know his performance is the kind of more over the top, but I quite like the, he kind of smirks, and there's a lot of black humour throughout. Like they talk about David turning up, and he was like, "Well, I think we'd all get a shock," and stuff like that. And it's very sort of like nudge, nudge, wink, wink, like you're in this joke that the body's in the trunk sort of thing. But I quite like the fact that when it counts or when it matters, there is that kind of streak of malice across his eyes. I think he really kind of stands out in this, whereas Farley Granger's more kind of like hysterical. Like at one point he actually just slaps him, like kind of slaps some sense into him. Like I do quite like the contrast in the performance. So I actually think that there's a lot of sort of what we call queer undertones in this. It's 1948, which I think is quite shocking. But obviously the implication is maybe that these three men are maybe more than just friends, or there's some sort of hint of kind of sexual relationship there as well. And I think that I'm pretty sure it was Farley Granger was actually in a relationship with Patrick Hamilton, who wrote the play at the time. So I think that for 1948, I think the sexual overtones are quite overt. So I think it's quite shocking for the time when you think about it. Even it's kind of late 40s, I think, and I do think it is quite obvious what's going on there.
It was masked enough so that it wasn't totally in your face. I don't know about the three-way aspect of James Stewart character being involved. He's more of a leader, someone who gives advice, like a cult leader. Like I know we were talking about cults earlier. He would be the one who encourages people to do things. Now, it was obviously his long talks with the boys when he was the form master, I think it was, at their old school. He almost is like planting the ideas. So there could be ideas of, going beyond the sort of sexual norms of the time as well, and just planting that idea and then stepping back and letting people do what they need to do. But yes, it's definitely there, but it's quite subtle to begin with. But yes, when the two guys mention, "Oh yeah, we're having a party because we're going upstate for 3 weeks," and you think, "Oh yeah, I bet you are, yeah, yeah, to isolate." Okay.
Is that something kind of like looking more kind of in retrospect, based on kind of like culture now? But do you think in 1948 there's kind of sexual overtones or undertones of that? You've mentioned kind of subtleness, John, and we can pick up on it now. But do you think audiences would have even noticed that at the time? I don't think they would have.
Probably not. No, I wouldn't think so. Not to the same extent, because it wouldn't be discussed in the same way. I don't think the way that films. And I'm not putting down like sort of people who reviewed films back then. They were as insightful as they are now, but you would be encouraged to look at a film in a certain way and discuss it in a certain way. There's enough to talk about in these films without getting into that. People would. If you started talking about the sexuality within characters within these films, people say, "Well, why are you trying to ruin this for us?" You know what America's like now, so you can imagine how bad it would be then.
The thing is, though, I don't actually think it's that subtle, but then maybe that's just me as a person in 2021 watching it and going, "Wow, that's really clear that there's kind of more to this relationship." I don't know. Maybe I sometimes think that these little kind of markers and stuff are put in that maybe if you were a gay man or whatever, and you'd gone to see this in 1948, maybe you would have picked up on the sort of the nods or the sort of hints or whatever. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't want to project too much on something that I don't know enough about, but
That's a fair point. I think in that case, maybe, I don't think the kind of general hetero audience had a certain idea of what gay men were like or gay culture, but they picked up the subtleness of it. And I just remember a story that actually I've done a film workshop years ago, I mean, like a long time ago, and people were asking about your favourite kind of actors and stuff, and this guy was saying, "I'm a big fan of Burt Lancaster, like a proper man's man kind of guy." And the guy in the workshop was saying, "Do you know he was gay?" And he's like, "What?" And he saw this guy's world crumble, and he's like, yeah, he was openly gay. I don't know if he was gay or bisexual, but he said he was gay in the context of the story. And it was quite like an open, it's not a secret type thing, and this guy's world was totally destroyed by this. Now, that's a different kind of context for the subtext and that, but it just reminded me of the fact the idea is like, people sometimes can't see what's in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, absolutely. I definitely think, and the thing is, like, it's funny because they do talk about how attractive certain men are in this film. So, like, Jan and the character of Mrs. Atwater, if that's how you say her name, they talk about how attractive they think James Mason and Cary Grant are, which is funny because they both go on to star in North by Northwest. But I think there's loads of topics about how good looking men are, because they talk about how, you know, David was good looking. They do kind of focus on the physical aspects of men in this film, and I do think the markers are there. Maybe not obvious if you've lived a kind of sheltered 1940s like housewife life, but I think that when you're looking at it now, you're like, okay, this is quite obvious, and it's, you know, these men seem to be in a relationship.
Well, just checking my notes here, because I've done so much prep for this.
Are you rustling some papers?
In the play, it's all more explicit.
Yeah.
So the idea, the film has kind of these kind of subtle tones in that. It didn't invent them. It's in the source material. That was the point of it. If anything, Hitchcock's had to tone it back a bit for a mainstream audience, but not enough to eradicate them completely. So
and the thing
it does make sense. And
yes, all I was going to say is, as we can see from, I mean, it gets progressively more obvious until you get to Frenzy, which is just all out, like, you know, an actual rape. But you can see throughout Hitchcock's career, even this, which is, you know, the late 40s, like, you know, sexual taboos, or whatever you want to call it, didn't really faze him. He was someone who was quite happy to, you know, include them, or, you know, show women in their bras or whatever, or have them in black underwear as opposed to white, which was, you know, seemingly so shocking. Like, I think he was someone who was always, there's questions as to whether or not he was getting off on it or not, but he was someone who was quite willing to sort of push the boundaries of what was being shown, and, like, you know, actually demonstrating that people have a sex life and stuff like that, which just wasn't even thought of. Another thing that I think is quite interesting about this film is there's loads of markers for his later works, I think. So there's the whole idea of, you know, the getting away with murder, which comes up as we'll talk about in Strangers in a Train. But you even get things like, you know, they actually serve food on the trunk where David is being kept, and there's a huge relationship between food and death and Frenzy, as we've talked about. And then towards the end, when the character of Rupert, you know, Jimmy Stewart's character, brings the rope out of his pocket, the neon light outside the apartment starts to flash green and red, which is exactly what happens to Jimmy Stewart's character in Vertigo. It's crazy how much, like, you look back at Hitchcock's work and you think you've stolen from yourself, like, your whole career. It's so interesting when you see these little snippets that you just think, oh, that relates back to whatever. Is there any other kind of markers that you guys saw that you thought, oh, that's quite similar to another movie?
There was, especially between Rope and Strangers in a Train, there was a number of scenes where you had characters who were in the extremes of the shot, say on the right hand side, and they were chatting, and there was something, they were obviously chatting about something quite serious, but the camera focused a long way away. Like, for instance, it was in Rope, it was the clearing of the table, or clearing of the chest. All the food was going back and forward, and the maid was bringing the books back and forward and all this. So that was building that up there. But this was all background stuff. Now, you got that an awful lot in that, but you also got it in Strangers in a Train, especially when they were having phone conversations. It was always someone standing on the right hand side, and other people were in the background having a discussion as well, and the two conversations were equally as important. So you were kind of split about how you were supposed to take it, what you were supposed to concentrate on. So, and he's done that right through his career, and other people have taken that up as well. Like, so Tarantino's done very similar types of things as well. But it was very noticeable watching these films back to back that there was that kind of element to it as well. And he does tend to like a bit of a set piece. You can tell that he enjoys having a set piece and working a camera around it rather than cutting. I know this one had, there was something maybe like 11 cuts or something in this film in total. Obviously the hidden ones, but even if you look at his other work, he tends not to do that if he can help it. Obviously the shower scene is a bit of a different case in point because there's something like 50 cuts in that scene, 78 seconds, 52 cuts, something like that. But yeah, he does, you can see that he does borrow and steal from himself, and he acknowledged it as well during his career. He says, well, why not, you know, I'm stealing from the best, so I may as well.
That's the exact same quote I was going to say. If you guys steal for the best type of thing, and there's nothing wrong with directors also having their own little like trademarks. You know, it's Scorsese with those kind of long tracking shots all the time. Paul Thomas Anderson has something similar. You mentioned Tarantino. Spielberg's also got that kind of like family relationship thing embedded in this film, where regardless what the movie is, it just seems to, it doesn't even shoehorn that in, it just naturally appears. It's so organic. I didn't really notice much else in terms of like allusions to other films and things like that, or little things, but I did think, and maybe it was just me, that I don't know if it was so much the character of Brandon Shaw, it was John Doyle himself, reminded me a lot of a young Jimmy Stewart.
Yes, he
Yeah.
did. He was very similar. I noted that quite early on. Some of his mannerisms, he came across as being very like a younger version of Jimmy Stewart. You're totally correct there, yeah.
And I wonder if that was a deliberate choice to demonstrate how much, you know, Cadell's character had impacted these guys. Because actually, you know, Doll and Granger almost look like kind of tall and short versions of each other as well. And they've obviously had to really amp up the personality points as well to sort of distinguish. But yeah, that could be a reason for that as well. And even just like the wee stutter that he developed when he got excited, like, you know, Jimmy Stewart and his wee shucks persona that would get, you know, stuttered over his words and stuff like that. But no, I never even thought about that actually.
It could actually have been quite deliberate though, because obviously he looked up to Rupert, so it may be that they were trying to subtly say that he wanted to be very like him, you know, and copying him in certain ways, but that might be a bit of a stretch on my part.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking of there as we were discussing that there. That would make perfect sense, or it's just the actor emulating maybe one of his favourite actors, but from a story character point of view, it makes a lot of sense. It's too much of it could be a coincidence, it could entirely be a coincidence, but it seems too much of one to be not deliberate, in my opinion.
What's interesting about this film as well, and it's kind of the same in Strangers in a Dream, the women are very much on the periphery. So the women in this film, they're, you know, a sister, a girlfriend, or a maid. Like, they're not characters who are driving the narrative forward in particular. And in fact, Brandon plays quite a cruel trick on Jan by, you know, inviting her ex-boyfriend and stuff like that along. So I think it's interesting where, you know, you talk about Hitchcock's treatment of women and stuff like that in both these films that we're discussing today. The women are very much on the periphery, and they almost have no agency. It's these bad men that are driving this forward. And I just thought that was quite interesting to note, that they just don't really have much to do beyond complain about, like, you know, having to clean up some dishes, or, you know, an ex-boyfriend showing up. Is a wee bit disappointing, but we'll not get into the sexual politics of that.
That part's not aged well, and you even try and look at the context of the time, 1948, it's still not aged very well as a...
Yeah.
To be honest, you still get it though in films now. I mean, you could highlight numerous examples of three characters who have very little to do with the actual film, and the one, like, obviously the sister-in-law character, she is basically verbally abused by Rupert for the whole time that they have any sort of interaction, and then beyond, he keeps bringing up the something of something and all that. Yeah, it's always mentioned, it always is, and he has this wee throwaway remark after the table had been taken away, all the food had been taken away, and he says, "Oh, I should marry that woman," basically because she's good at clearing away dishes and she puts on a good spread, you know. You're thinking, very good mate.
It's just interesting that, you know, there's no female victim in this, but the females that are here just have no agency whatsoever. Although, Sammy, you've touched on it, it's almost like an episode of Columbo, right? Because you know who's done it, and it's just a case of how he's going to piece it together. There are still moments of, you know, classic Hitchcock tension. You know, they go to, the cleaner goes to put the books back in the trunk, and you're like, no, don't go in there because there's a body in there. Or, you know, Rupert Cadell gets the wrong hat and he notices the initials on the inside, and you're like, oh shit, he's going to work that out. So I do think that for all we know who's done what, I think the tension is still executed really well throughout.
Definitely, and that's part of the genius of leaving the body in plain sight, so to speak, because you remove the body from the set, like the scene, who cares? But the fact that you know, fair enough, you know the killers are as well, so that's an interesting murder mystery aspect of it. But the mystery then becomes, are they going to find this body and find the killers? We know the killers, but they've got to discover them. And the whole time you keep thinking, that body's in there, and no, they don't know, they're leading on it and all sorts, and you're like, and they're going to knock, you keep thinking they're going to knock it over.
Yeah.
You know, the tension's great. It's really well done. It's very cleverly done as well. I know it's based on a play in that as well, but it is very unique. Even I think for today's standards, that idea, if you try to do that now, I'm sure it has been done, it would just go with somebody's copy and rope.
Yeah. what you expect is Rupert to turn into this sort of detective, but he doesn't really. He's obviously clever enough to pick up on the clues. What you're really seeing is the two main characters messing up because they're convinced, or at least they think they have committed the perfect murder, and they've done it with such style during the day and everything like that. So you know that that's going to be the point that's going to break them, because there isn't such a thing as a perfect murder. It just doesn't happen, especially when it's staged in this sort of way. And they're inviting people to try and figure it out. They want Rupert to figure it out because they want Rupert to join in. They want validation from him. They want him to say, "Well done, lads. Let's go and do it again." Let's take out somebody else. But that they're clever, but they're not that clever to get away with it. It's all about the show for them, and all about the post-coital cigarette aspect of it. They want that to last as long as possible, because it's got to do with the feeling as well as the fact that they were physically able to carry it out.
And do you feel, because I've obviously watched this quite a few times, and I have different feelings towards different characters each time I watch it, do you feel like a sort of equal amount of sympathy for Brandon and Philip, or do you think they're both equally, fully responsible, or how do your sympathies lie throughout this movie?
It goes back to the alpha male sort of scenario for me, because you are always going to get the case where the follower is going to get caught up in something that they don't particularly want to do, and this is a prime example of it. They are equally culpable because they're both involved in it and they both agreed to it. But yes, there is a driving force from one, and there's a follower who is far more fragile. I mean, you know that he's far more fragile because he plays the piano. He's more artistic. He's not quite hard enough to be involved in that. And that's another thing that will come up. We'll speak about that again, Strangers in a Train, with regards to Farley Granger. But yes, they are both equally responsible as far as I'm concerned, but basically because of the makeup of the relationship more than anything else.
What about you, Simi? Do your sympathies change?
No, not really. I mean, if you're going to have any semblance of sympathy, it would be more towards Philip. But yeah, the culpability's there, unfortunately. So I saw very well about abilities to follow on type like that. But you had many, many chances to do the right thing, and I have no sympathy towards either of them.
Yeah,
yep.
I do. Yeah. I do love that line as well, John. Is it the Mrs. Atwater character where she has this, and she goes, "Oh, those hands are going to make you famous." And you're like, "Oh, I know," because they were on a rope 5 minutes ago. So yeah, I mean, I do like this film. I like the fact there's no shitting about. First thing that happens, dead body, and I like the fact that you kind of follow it from start to finish. And while Brandon's eyes are always kind of twinkling, like he kind of wants them to get caught almost so they can bask in his notoriety, and obviously Philip's sort of unraveling. I do love this movie, and it's one that I can watch sort of over and over again, and each time I'll pick up different things and different wee shots and different wee nudges to other movies. Do you guys have anything else that you want to add about your viewing experience this time around?
It was just a wee bit about the actual production itself. I was reading a wee bit about it, and they were saying that obviously because it was long takes, like 10 minutes, 10, 11 minutes, which is the length, the amount of film you can actually have in a camera before it gets changed over. It was then. I don't know if it, obviously everything's digital now, so it's slightly different, but it was executed in such a way that it was almost like a play, because the camera was a feature. It was quite a big heavy camera that they were using for the single shot, and it had to be manipulated as you saw it. It was quite strange at first when you watched it, because you weren't used to a camera moving in that sort of way. It would just have been a cut between one shot and another, but the camera actually had to move. So in order to facilitate that, the majority of the set had to be on silent wheels so that they could move walls out the way, and everything had to work in such a way that a camera would be able to move, so that it's not like you used to see it where if it went between two rooms, you would still see the wall between the two rooms, and the camera would just go past it, but this was done in such a way that you didn't see any of that, and then if the camera panned round, there would be a wall behind it because the wall had been put back in. So it was a performance in all aspects of it, from the actual actors who were front and centre and from the crew as well in the background, because they had almost a more difficult job to do, because they had to make sure that everything was running smoothly, so that the entire 10-minute sequence would run without any hitches at all, which is tremendous. It takes so much planning to do something like that, over and top of just a normal film. And I know James Stewart wasn't particularly happy with it, because he felt it was more of an exercise than a film in that respect, because the emphasis was on the fact that it was very cleverly done, and it was something that was quite awkward to do, and I don't think he really appreciated doing that at all.
Which is interesting, yeah, because like that's goes on what I was going to say anyway. It is I never thought this film like a gimmick. I didn't ever watch it and go, yeah, this is just an excuse to try and do it in one shot. And I think that really kind of owes to the fact that it is based on a play, and it is just this one setting basically the entire time, just it's more or less in that room. So you can see certain films and you think, yeah, it's a gimmick, it's shot a certain way. Like a film Hardcore Henry, which is all like point of view. It's a gimmick film. That's the kind of point of it. In 1917, I didn't agree it was a gimmick movie, although some people criticised it for being one, because I had that kind of single long take type thing. I thought it was well done. I thought it really added to the story, and I feel like it did the same here. Added to the tension. It worked because of it. It wasn't just let's just try and do something clever and see if it works. That's what I got from it anyway. I thought it was the one shot aspect of it really added to the tension in the story, and again because it's based on a play.
Definitely. I mean, one shot, essentially one location, and you literally feel like you're talking about the walls are moving. You do feel like the walls are closing in on these guys as this sort of moves towards its conclusion. So yeah, I think it's definitely cleverly done. Obviously, we've enjoyed watching and chatting about Rope. The next movie we're going to talk about is 1951's Strangers on a Train, starring Robert Walker and Farley Granger again. So there's at least one link to Rope. This movie is adapted from the Patricia Highsmith novel, and it was actually adapted for the screen by Raymond Chandler, so you do get quite a nice, lovely noir feel about it. And the film is exactly as the title suggests. Two strangers meet on a train, Bruno and Guy, and again, similar to Rope, within the first 10 minutes, murder is discussed. Bruno decides that he knows how to commit the perfect murder. Him and Guy just have to tell each other who they don't like. They'll swap murders, carry them out, and the police, etc., will be none the wiser. And the best bit is they'll get away with it. Obviously, things don't quite go to plan, and a sort of thrilling wrong man or a mystery thriller ensues for the rest of the film. And for some bizarre reason, a rather long tennis match. Simi, we'll start with you this time. What did you think of this movie?
When I put this on, I'd heard of it, obviously. And you sometimes watch a lot of kind of older films with some kind of hesitations, right? What you kind of think to yourself, how's the pacing going to be? Is it going to live up to the hype? Is this one of these better films? You know, so for example, I love Psycho. I thought Rope was excellent. There's a lot of Hitchcock films I really, really like. Rear Window. And to me, I know that Strangers on a Train, Rope and that are still really well known. To me, they're these lesser known ones, the ones I know less of. And when this film started, I thought, this seems very convoluted. This amateur tennis star and these wives, his daughter, a senator. It just seems like a lot of kind of like really backstory. But I absolutely loved this. I thought it was such an entertaining movie. I thought Farley Granger was brilliant as a villain. I wouldn't even have put him as the same cat. It didn't seem like the same actor from film to film. I thought it was so different in his performance, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun and very, very gripping for a film that I also felt was very, very slow paced. Didn't really. The tension for me was always underlying, and it wasn't any points that I felt was kind of getting ramped up, and I was kind of I was never on the edge of my seat. I was just quite happily gripped for the majority of the runtime.
John, do you feel the same way?
Not quite in terms of the Farley Granger character. He's a very weak. I don't mean that in his performance, but in terms of the character he plays, he's weak in both of them. He's the beta male in both films.
That's a fair point. Actually, that's a fair point. Yeah,
I know what you were saying, but yes, so he's in a way. I'd have been quite happy for him to get caught. at the end of this because of the sort of the character that he was in this. And again, it's in similar to Fashion with Rope, you don't really like anybody in this film at all. That it's the same. You don't like the two central characters. You're predisposed to not like because they're horrible in different ways. As I say, Farley Granger character is a bit weak, and Bruno is he's an over the top, egomaniacal. Again, if he had a moustache, it would be a twirling. And all the supporting characters as well, none of them are particularly nice. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a good film. It was a very, very good film. I really enjoyed this. Something I did notice when you were talking about the use of certain elements from film to film, there was a couple of elements in this film, like the use of a lighter, the use of a tie pin to a, he had his name in the tie pin so that somebody could identify him later on. Yeah, it was that guy Bruno that did it, So,
him with his giant tie pin that says, yeah, that's very good.
So there was stuff like that, but yes, it was a very, very well put together film. And I did really enjoy it for that. Like I say, there wasn't these sort of like lots of big highs and lows in the film, but it did move along at a really sort of a nice clip of everybody got what they deserved out of it, and it was very, very entertaining to watch it.
Yeah, I think having watched them both literally back to back in the same day, I was looking at Bruno and Brandon and kind of trying to, look at it because they're both quite, larger than life. Bruno certainly comes across as very, hedonistic and, he's kind of wild with all these ideas. And again, it brought me back to this whole idea of these sort of, queer undertones. Bruno appears in a silk robe at one point and he's getting his manicure done, and the two of them actually meet because he accidentally plays footsie with him. And again, I'm looking at this and going, there was a lot of clear, markers here, and the whole idea of Bruno going after, he wants to go after Guy's ex-wife, and then he's got daddy issues and he wants daddy bumped off. And I thought this is again quite clearly marking out that this relationship could potentially be something more. But we've obviously talked about sort of how that maybe be read back in the time. My favourite thing about Bruno, though, is the fact that not only is he just a total shit willing to murder someone, but my favourite scene in this whole movie is when he's heading towards Guy's ex-wife and he just pops the kid's balloon with a cigarette. And that's the sign of a true shit. There's no joy in life that you actually want to pop a wee kid's balloon. So, but yeah, again, loads of markers towards, other films. Psycho's a big one for me. You look at Guy's ex-wife and she's meant to be, a bad girl, and her name's Miriam, which is quite similar to Marion. And, these are this whole idea of bad girls getting what they deserve, which is very much a common theme in Hitchcock movies. But what did you guys think of, again, so two strong male leads, and what did you think of the females in this film as well?
Again, very much in the periphery. The Miriam character had more to do. She was actually quite a strong character in that she was the equal of the men. She knew what she wanted and she knew just how to get it, and she wasn't somebody that really could be messed with, which I found quite interesting as a character. You don't normally get those type of characters at all, especially since it turned out that, it was her that had instigated the divorce in the first place, the divorce proceedings in the first place, and she was actually pregnant with another man's child. But even that, there was no shame about that. And from her point of view, she was like, well, I'll just tell him we're yours. And he kind of crumpled when he was told that. It was interesting. But if you contrast that with the new fiance, there was virtually nothing about her. She may have been the daughter of a senator, but her character was almost cardboard cutout. So it was like the simpering little woman that still, we'll be okay and all this, all that sort of stuff. I was so worried about you, darling, and all this sort of stuff. And it's just like you've seen it dozens of times, if not hundreds of times before, that type of nothing character. And it didn't take away from the film because it was there for a specific reason, but it didn't add to it in any way either. It didn't help develop the story in any way. It was there just as another sort of crutch for one of the characters to lean on and for him to spell out all his problems. Now, obviously, everybody in the film had problems, but it was only him that was allowed to actually say, oh, well, there's this and that. I'm getting framed here, and it was, oh, you poor boy, this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I just don't even think he's that nice a character. Like, he goes after Miriam in the record, and obviously he's upset, but about the way she behaves. But she's very provocative, very ballsy, and they sort of use the doubling or sort of image mirroring between her and Barbara, who's Anne's sister. And Barbara definitely has a lot more agency and a lot more to her than Anne, because she at least sort of cracks jokes about him getting carted off, whereas Anne literally just spends the whole film like mooning at him and being like, "Oh, it's all going to be okay, darling." And it's just, the interesting thing for me is that I don't think Guy's a particularly likable character, and I actually kind of wanted to see more of Miriam and of Barbara, because they actually had a little bit of noose about them, and they were quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. And who knew that amateur tennis was so big in the States?
I know.
Everywhere he went, it was like, Guy, you're the amateur tennis player, aren't you?
It's the one thing about this movie that, and they're kind of similar runtimes as well, and I really love the way the tension is built. But that tennis match, I know it's meant to build tension, but it pulls me out of it every time, and I find myself, if I'm being honest, fast forwarding it, because it totally takes me out of this relationship between Bruno and Guy, and all the sort of nefarious goings on. It takes me out of it. I don't understand why it's there. That seems a very odd choice, even for Hitchcock. I don't get it. Do you guys have it? What? Why?
I didn't like there was some of the crowd shots where you had Bruno sitting in the crowd, and he's obviously fixated on him.
That was good.
And, that was good because he was sitting there and he was wearing sunglasses and he looked quite evil and intent. Yeah. But obviously the direction was for everybody else, follow the pretend match, and they were all totally exaggerating the way they were doing it. It was like, I mean, where the hell is this ball ending up? Because the way they were looking.
It's so bizarre, and to this day I cannot work out, because it's quite in the sort of final third of the film, it takes up quite a lengthy chunk of that section, and I'm like, every time I watch it, I'm like, why is this here? Because the film doesn't need it. He walks about in tennis whites and carries a racket. We get it.
I think part of the point of that was to try and build up a wee bit of tension, because there's tension within a sport as well while he's playing and everything. But there's also the tension of the fact of what is going to be coming out of this, what's going to happen next. But yeah, it did go on a wee bit too long. Yeah.
Do you think in retrospect that the tennis scene it's just not aged very well for us? But maybe at the time people thought it was like watching a real tennis match on cinema. Yeah. Like the idea of the train driving towards the camera and people freaking out at the time. They're like, this is what it must be like watching a tennis match. And I'm like, yeah, if the ball is traveling in slow motion.
Yeah, it's very. And then you contrast that with and that's obviously a big spectacle, a big sort of scene with loads of extras and stuff like that. You contrast that with the murder itself, which is really intimate, and it's shot really beautifully, as well as the iconic shot of her being strangled and you see it in the reflection of her glasses. One thing that I noticed this time, which I haven't clocked before, is that when Bruno follows Miriam into the tunnel of love and she's got the two blokes with her, his boat is called Pluto. How fucking clever is that? And it's just that wee touch that you're just like, oh, that's that is beautiful. And then what's going to come. And then they have this, given that it's a stranger, that he's murdering a stranger, the murder itself is so personal because he actually strangles her and his hands are physically on her neck. And then you've got that beautiful little shot. What do you think of the build up to the murder? How did you think that was executed? Because that's quite an iconic, I would argue, quite an iconic moment of Hitchcock's.
No, so I was going to say, I like the build up because, like I was saying earlier, there wasn't this kind of rampant intention. It was just slowly, steady. Even the murder itself wasn't that explosive. As you'll see, it's quite intimate, and it wasn't thrilling. It wasn't shocking in a way. It was just, it maintained that same level of tension that really suited the character as some kind of evil villain that was just there all the time. And they kind of pop up at the tennis match, he's popping up for tea and things like that. He's always hiding in plain sight. Even the murder itself seemed quite sloppy in a way.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's stalking them, he wasn't really hiding very well. But I liked that about it. I liked the fact he's not kind of hiding in the bushes and stuff. It just always seemed to be this ever known presence. And I think that really worked in aspects of him kind of haunting and stalking guy. He was always there. He's happy to do this kind of stuff in plain sight. the way he's happy to kind of just hide in plain sight and be like, hi, I'm still here. By the way, you owe me a murder.
Yeah, because the thing is, there's a couple of times where he does like really bad stage whispers where he's like, guy, and then he's in like a big echoey like museum or something like that, and you're like, oh, subtle as fuck. That's really good.
Again,
Sorry, John, you were going to say there something.
There's a whole sort of sexual aspect to this as well, where he's it's the build up to it when he's following her. When he gets on the boat, or just before he gets on the boat to go through the tunnel of love, he buys popcorn. So it's almost as if it's very voyeuristic. He's sitting there chewing away at the popcorn while he's going, because he's anticipating what's going to be coming next, what's going to be happening. It's almost as if he's picturing in his head, like it's a film that he's sort of following, thinking, oh, I'll do this and then I'll do that. But yes, it was very, very well done. And the fact that he didn't show very much emotion at all, he was very straight during it, and he didn't come across as being evil in any way. It was just very sort of plain-faced, and it was just all done subtly. It was done with the eyes. It was done with maybe a sort of slight smirk and everything like that. He played off of Miriam because she was the one that was always looking back and looking for him and looking out for him, because she thought it was something else that was going to be happening, obviously. But it's quite interesting. There was an interesting wee point that actor who played Miriam had perfect eyesight. And she had to wear these glasses, these bottle glasses that meant that she couldn't see. And that's why she's got two men with her, because they had to help her, like on and off the bus. She couldn't actually see the merry-go-round that they were on. So she had, when you see it, she's actually getting help up from both of them because she can't see where she's going at all.
And here was me thinking she was just getting a good time. Like, I didn't know that. That's very cool. I think the thing is about Bruno is he's an intense presence from the start. So I mean, first of all, I don't talk to people in public transport, as you know. I try and avoid people. This is why I don't talk to them, because within the first 10 minutes of the film, he's like, dude, I'll murder your ex-wife if you do my dad. And like, he's very intense from the very start. And you've rightly said, Thomas, he's just everywhere. Like, he goes for a drink, he makes a phone call, he does this, he does that. He's at the tennis match. He's just this really intense presence. And it's definitely his character, I feel, that sort of drives this along, because you're waiting for like, oh god, he seems a bit unhinged and he really wants him to murder someone back, like, you know, what's going to happen next. And then you see him at that kind of society dinner where he's, you know, saying to the lady, he's goad again, like a little bit like Brandon and Rope, where, you know, sort of goading them into saying, oh, I bet you've said I could kill you to your husband and stuff like that. Like, he goads them into admitting that they want to kill someone, and obviously that culminates in him, you know, taking the granny strangling a bit too far. But he is this really intense, unhinged presence as well, and I think that's what builds the tension up as well, because he seems like a loose cannon and you kind of have no idea, you know, where he's going to go next. So what I think is quite interesting about this, is what I've said that about 16 times, what I love about this film is that similar to Rope, there's no particularly likeable characters as well. And having rewatched it this time as well, I really found how much I despised Guy, and I was kind of shocked by this, because actually he's not done anything wrong. Okay, he's accumulated an ex-wife, but I was surprised by how much I wanted him almost to get caught for this time around. I don't know if it's because I'd watched Rope prior to it, but he's not a particularly likable character. And in actual fact, Bruno, for all that he's like, you know, a little bit crazy, has more sort of personality and a wee bit more flair to him. And probably another one to add to my list of things that's wrong with me, but it's just something I've picked up on this time. Because even when Guy's sort of on the run as the wrong man, you don't really care. You're like, okay, that's fine. And there's the scene in the tennis match where, you know, Bruno's trying to get the lighter back from under the storm drain, and you actually are willing his fingers to get to it. You're like, yeah, just frame him, set him up. And it's weird, because I don't remember feeling like that before about this.
I think that's a fair point, because watching it, I was like, if this film ends and Guy has been sent to prison for murder, I'm cool with that. and it was not because I didn't really think about it. I suppose I'm kind of thinking in more retrospect since you mentioned that. It's not because I hated the character or that. It was just something just dead. Maybe the characters were a lot more similar than I thought when I think about it. Actually, there was just something. You're right. There was something dead, kind of weak and just there about him. Great performance. I thought the performances were great. Especially in this, it just, because I don't think it was anything to do with the actor just being quite a bit of wet wipe, for lack of a better term. It was just he played the character in a kind of way that you're like, I don't really have a great deal of sympathy for you. Yeah, it sucks you've been framed for murder and your wife's been murdered, but you know, if you went to jail and all the Bruno there, go with it.
Yep. He's a victim of his own weakness, isn't he? All throughout the film, because it starts off, he was obviously married in the first place, and then through no fault of his own, divorce proceedings were raised against him. So at that point, why is his lawyers not involved in that? Because his ex-wife has got lawyers involved. He's having to deal with that. He's doing all of that on his own. He treats Bruno in the same way. He's not able to brush him off at any point. Yeah. When Bruno starts talking to him, he tries to get away from him, but it's all very sort of half-hearted. He's a very sort of a weak person. Now, I think it's not really brought up in the film at all, but I kind of get the impression that Bruno has been doing this for quite a while. Mm-hmm. He's been like that for quite a while. He's had this idea for a long time, and you kind of suspect he's approached other people to try and do this, because he's very well researched on Guy. He knows all about him. For somebody that you've just met, if you think about it, if you met a sportsman on, say you were on a train, you wouldn't know what their personal circumstances particularly were and what they were trying to do. And so he's obviously done an awful lot of research on Guy, and you kind of suspect that the fact that they actually met on the train wasn't an accident at all.
No, definitely not.
All set up. And he knew the type of person that Guy is, because if he's done his research on his family background and his situation, he will have researched the man as well and known what buttons to press in order to try and manipulate him and try and get him to do what he wants to do.
Yeah, and it's usually like the whole idea of the murder, like that has definitely not come sort of off the cuff. That's something he's been working on for a while. Whether he's wanted to kill his father for a while and that's what it stemmed from, or whether he just sort of, it luxuriates in the drama and the sort of almost the kind of decadence of actually taking someone's life, because that's kind of what it's like in Rope as well. But yeah, you're definitely right. None of this is coincidence. The meeting on the train, the actual plan for the murder, none of it, I believe, is a coincidence at all. Apart from sort of, there's always crossover with cast with Rope as well. I was trying to think of sort of points in the movie that sort of reminded me of other films. Now, there's this kind of whole idea of, the kind of decadent villain, which I think always comes back. I always kind of come back to sort of Uncle Charlie. There's obviously the tie-pin in Frenzy as well. But I kind of thought the carousel at the end reminded me of the Merry Widow Waltz in Shadow of a Doubt as well, because that keeps playing throughout when Uncle Charlie's talking and you hear that kind of tinkly sort of sideshow music. I'm trying to think of any sort of other obvious examples as well. Like, I think because it's so close to the source material as well, and I don't think you would piss Patricia Highsmith off by mucking about with stuff.
Well, it changed the character quite a bit, didn't it? Bruno. Bruno was a lot more kind of, hardened in the book, but it kind of made him a lot more kind of softer, like a mummy's boy type character, which is more Hitchcock. It turned him into a kind of Hitchcock villain. Yeah. Other than that, I'm not really too sure what it kind of goes for the source material. But it's the fact when Guy goes to the house, he's trying to convince Bruno's mother that his son's a killer, and she's like, eh? And I'm like, it's a bit weird though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I got the police. You're going to try and this is the angle you're going for. And this kind of takes me so to kind of jump a bit towards the end of the film. I felt it was wrapped up too nicely.
That is the same in a number of Hitchcock films. If you look back in Rope, the way that's wrapped up with the gun getting shot out the window, and then they'll just sit down and they wait for the police to arrive, and you're kind of thinking, in real life, if the police turned up, there's a guy sitting at the piano playing, there's another one sitting drinking, and there's a third guy sitting beside the body, they're not going to come in and say, right, you two, away you go, James Stewart, you're fine, right, that's it, they're going to take them all away. And this is the same here at the very end. They accept his explanation very, very quickly. They just say, right, I've seen you playing tennis.
It couldn't possibly be tennis star Guy Haynes. He would never be a murderer.
Yeah.
Like, Another scene that I like in this movie as well is when Guy says, okay, I'm going to do it, I'm going to murder your dad. And then he breaks into his house with his little map, his little crude map that he's been drawn. And then he gets
Love
up
that.
the stairs and Bruno's just sitting in the bed like, I knew you wouldn't do it. And he's like really propped up in the bed. And there's something about it that I just find so, like, Bruno's so cocky. And this is just like peak of his kind of arrogance of like, I knew you wouldn't do it. I knew you were weak. And I think that's why it's kind of been bugging me this time. I think that's why the Guy character has bothered me, because he's just so wimpy and weedy, and he's there to wake his dad up and say, your son's trying to kill you. And I'm not saying he should have committed murder to prove his like, manhood or whatever, but there's just something about him that's so wimpy that it just doesn't wash with me. So
yeah, because if ever Bruno kind of goading them into the murder and stuff like that and kind of mocking them, it kind of starts off and he kind of keeps going back to him and say, right, we had a deal here. For my part, you fulfill yours, and then it starts to go off in the fact that I know you wouldn't do it. So I'm always going to torture you instead, which is even more twisted. But yeah, I just kind of go back to it again quickly. It was just I know you say this; it's quite common in Hitchcock films, but here just was really grating for me. It was like the cops like, this guy, we know you're a murderer, we're going to do it. Oh, hold a minute, this guy just told me it was Bruno. There's a lighter. I'll believe you. Come to the police station next day. We'll sort it out, chap. Sorry about the inconvenience, and off we go.
Back to your tennis.
No, I think is it beyond the runs of possibility that they were both involved?
Yeah, I think the thing is as well, because he'd and this is obviously what they play on, he'd very publicly had that bust up with the ex of the record shop the day before, and he physically did put his hands on her, so there is an anger there somewhere that is expressed physically, and the fact that they're just like okay with the fact, oh right, okay, well, Tennis Guy says he's not done it, so we'll just I think in Rope it feels more organic the way that he kind of works it out, and he's obviously trying to, like, this does feel very, very shoehorned, and the only Patricia Highsmith I've ever read is Talented Mr. Ripley, so I can't comment on how it ends in the book, but it did feel like, and the thing is, the build-up is so good, like I know it's maybe a wee bit dated now, but you've got the carousel that's going out of control, and it's quite disorientating, and it's smoky, and there's screaming, and you've got the fairground assistant trying to crawl under the carousel to stop it from running. And I actually read this morning that Hitchcock said that was the hardest scene to film, because if that guy had moved his head even an inch, he said it would have been a murder we were filming, not a thriller. So there you go. But I like the way that tension is built, and the two of them are kind of wrestling on the carousel. A manly thing to do, to wrestle on a carousel. And then after all that build up, it just kind of falls apart again at the end, because they just accept this explanation. It does seem a bit
like the carousel, doesn't it?
Yeah. Wait.
Yeah. Not disputing not taking away from the fact that the cops have accidentally murdered the man, and they're just, that's good. We're kind of nitpicking here a wee bit at this stage, but it's the idea. It's like it's just a guy misses, kills a carousel worker, which causes the big finale. And it's like, oh, sorry, old chap, we're going our way. You accidentally murdered this guy. Are we going to discuss that? No, cool. Here we go.
Do you think the other Carney died as well? See the wee guy that crawled under, because obviously he pulled the lever back. You would have thought that if he'd volunteered, right? He's volunteering to go and crawl under it. You would think that he would know how to stop it safely and not just put the handbrake on.
Just rattle everyone off it.
Yeah, aye. So obviously that all fell to bits, so he must have died as well. But what really got me was obviously they'd said, like, when he was crawling underneath it, they obviously said, right, we have to keep the tension going here, so we need to do something when you're about halfway there. So he stops and he gets the hank out and he wipes his brow to go, oh, it's really tense, and then on he goes. You're going, the fuck are you doing? Just go on. There's people falling off this damn thing.
There's kids screaming up there.
He's a wee bit sweaty,
Yeah.
Oh, how fast was it going that you could have just maybe jumped and been okay?
It seems like, the kids.
But if it was going that fast, how could you stand on it, really?
Yeah, aye.
Yeah.
If you get into the physics of these things,
I'm just nitpicking. I'm just nitpicking at this point, really. But
no, it's. And I almost think, again, there's a sort of like hint at this whole kind of queerness thing. The fact that, Bruno gets killed by a painted carousel horse. Like, I do think there's nothing manly or dignified about that sort of death as well. But, I was reading a lot about this because obviously Rope and Strangers have these quite obvious sort of maybe queer relationships. And actually, it's a shame because there's so many films that you're looking for queer representation during this era, and actually all of the sort of maybe sort of men who there's kind of hinted at might be gay, they're all villains. They're all murderers. They're all bad guys. So it's a really kind of sad portrayal of the times as it were. And then obviously gets lobbed with the carousel horses. Everyone sort of goes flying off it while this guy slams on the brake. And it was just interesting reading up about that, not to put a dampener on the tone of the runaway carousel. And of course, this film ties itself up really neatly as well, because it literally ends with the same scene that it started with. He's on the train with Anne simpering over him, and a vicar goes, "You're Guy Haynes," and he's like, "Right, okay, I'm getting up in a moving carriage," because the vicar might ask him to murder someone as well.
And I really like that, because watching it, I would have been surprised if the credits just rolled at the carousel. It's like, you're off the hook. He's a real murder. Photoshop, off you go type thing. Because Hitchcock, films of that era, not just Hitchcock, but films of that era as well, could just stop very abruptly.
Yeah.
Once the plot was done. But I liked that we had at the end. It was quite a little nudge, wink to the camera, and it was fun.
Murder never stops. There's always someone going to ask you on the ScotRail to Clarkston if you're willing to do a wee swap.
I mean, it's like, I mean, we can talk about this film and how Bruno's like talking to somebody in the train, but we've all got the first bus before. We've also got a night bus. We've all sat next to somebody that's a lot worse than Bruno.
Yeah.
At least Bruno didn't get his testicles out. That's all I'm saying about my night bus experience.
When did you get your testicles out in the bus?
Oh my god! I swear there was a guy one time who got on in a proper like flasher smack and literally just came on the bus, opened it up and shouted testicles, and sure enough there were two of them.
Wow.
In a jar at the side.
Is there anything else you guys want to touch on about this? Touch on maybe a bad choice of words after that, but anything else you guys want to discuss about this movie?
Just the framing device at the very opening of it, when they arrive at the train station and the camera follows both Bruno and Guy separately to the train, and the difference between the two of them, you get a real sense of the characters before you've actually even seen above their knees. You haven't seen them in any way apart from the fact that Bruno is wearing spats, he's wearing Oxford bags, so he's all very jaunty and everything, and the way that he walks is what he's walking with a purpose, you can tell he's very confident, whereas Guy, sort of standard brown Oxfords, and I don't know what colour suit, obviously, because it was in black and white. Probably brown. I would imagine it would be a brown suit.
I always imagine him in brown as well. Yeah. So it was very regular and normal. So the difference between the two people, the fact that one of them was, if you just showed pictures of their shoes, you would say, which one is the alpha male here? And you say, well, guy with the spats has to be. So it sets out right from the very start who's the sort of dominant character, and I thought that was very cleverly done, very, very interesting the way they managed to do that. I would totally agree, and it just shows you how much costume and posture make a difference to a character as well. I also love when they get on the train, and the whole Chandler thing, and it is very noir because they have the train blinds that are casting like they're literally kind of got the stripy lights across their face, stripy lighting across their face, and I just thought that felt very atmospheric right from the get-go. Simster, I thought you were going to add something. Sorry.
No, just nothing.
No, just
not in agreement.
Just thinking about the runaway carousel and the physics.
Joseph.
So, thank you so much for listening to the Hitchathon, the Moviescramble podcast. And if you've got anything you want us to discuss, you can get in touch with us on social media, all the usual channels at Moviescramble. And if you want to email us, it is podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. John is super lonely and he has 2 weeks off work, so if you'd like to fill his inbox, that would be lovely. But in the meantime, until our next episode, it is goodbye from me and my esteemed colleagues.
Bye.